Today we're going to talk about a few of the things that I do when I refinish a spear gun. We're going to keep it pretty simple, but when we're done, this thing's going to look almost as good as new. So the first thing to do whenever we begin a rebuild is to remove all of the hardware. As you can see, it's not always easy, and you might struggle with a little bit of it. I kind of suggest that if you can't replace it, don't force it, because a lot of times bolts will seize, particularly if it's stainless going into aluminum like on this handle base. And worst case scenario, I can cut that handle off and drill it all out and or replace it. But if you don't have those materials on hand, it becomes a little bit risky to start forcing stuff. So particularly if you're doing this for your friends, make sure that you're not gonna destroy something. You're always going to wind up with salt that's going to accumulate in certain areas. Like on this gun, we're going to find it in a lot of different places. Now this particular gun is owned by a guy that fishes commercially. He's one of the charter captains here, and this gun is in the water 250 days a year. So it's about 2 years old, and it's seen some serious wear and tear. I don't know how many fish it's harvested. Hundreds, maybe thousands. You can see, if you look, I've got a drill sitting there, or a hammer drill, but I don't use it throughout this whole thing. I'm using a manual screwdriver. The reason I use a manual screwdriver is it's pretty hard to overpower the bolts. Quick note on what I just showed you. That was the color of the gun before. You can see now it's all grayed out. But by using a manual screwdriver, I can't strip those bolts or break the screws or anything like that. But with a hammer drill, I certainly can. The other thing I potentially could do is strip out one of these holes. Again, you're going to get parts that are going to stick like this, and I'm using a block so that I don't damage or mar the stainless by hitting it with a hammer. So that little bit of torque at an angle popped it right out, and I'm picking off a little bit of the scale that was underneath of it. Right now I'm tapping out the trigger pins. I tend to use whatever's handy. I oftentimes won't use a hammer if I've got a 2x4 or something sitting nearby. That way if I happen to miss and I hit the gun, I don't damage the gun with putting a big hammer mark in it. Try to be careful when you pull the trigger pins out. Every now and then trigger pins will stick a little bit, and particularly if the holes weren't drilled dead on, and you can actually rip out the side of the gun. So, and I see a lot of people that have had guns worked on, and you see kind of a missing wood right next to the trigger pin holes. Here again, I'm just removing the rest of the hardware. I need to get all the hardware off so that I can sand it, and then when I go to put the first couple of coats of oil refinish on it, it won't get all over the stainless. So there we go. And I promise I wasn't really picking my nose. I was rubbing my face. But put it in the comments anyway. I can't wait. Alright, so here I'm just setting up the sander. You're going to see I've got my dust mask on already. And I know nobody really wants to listen to the sander run for 10 or 15 minutes, so I muted it. You can already see, just with a couple of passes, I've already got good wood underneath of it. Now, one of the things that's going to happen, because this thing has been in salt water so much, that it really soaks up the oil. Now, I'm sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. I don't like to use anything more aggressive unless I'm trying to feather out a big ding or a dent or something like that. 99% of the time, though, I use 220, and sometimes I'll even step up to 320 or 350. So usually I don't ever go higher than that, because there simply isn't a need unless I'm doing some kind of a clear coat finish, and then I might take it all the way up to 2000 grit. So I'm just using dry. This is just dry sanding. Again, I'm wearing a dust mask. If you do a lot of these, there are different chemicals that have been imparted in that wood, different oils and solvents and whatnot, and of course the teak itself. And I'm not exactly sensitive to any of this stuff, at least I wasn't, but I notice that my allergies tend to come on a little bit quicker these days, and it's probably because of the humongous amount of sawdust I've ingested over the years. So a little bit of safety is always a good idea. This particular mask has got a little filter on the front that doesn't fog up your glasses. And you know, yeah, I know I'm not wearing my protective eyewear. Usually when I run the sander, I don't bother. But anyway, I'm just going to sand this entire thing, try to get it as smooth as I can, try to expose good wood and get rid of that silvered teak, and you know, get back down to that good wood, and then we can begin refinishing. Alright, so I've set up for refinishing and or applying the oil, and I always put down some kind of a drop cloth underneath. These are paper pads that I use, and they're great for soaking up oil. You're going to see me adjust them. The reason I did that was when I set them down, the edge of the paper is not even with the edge of the workbench, and my dumbass would set that oil right on the edge of that paper, and there wouldn't be anything supporting it and wind up all over my shoes. So I always urge you to set your workbench up and your drop cloths up so that the edges are consistent with one another. Otherwise, you're going to wind up wearing half the stuff that you're trying to put on the gun. So really all I'm doing here is I'm just applying a flood coat of finish, and it's nothing special. This is Watco teak oil. Watco teak oil is it's actually a finish. It has some solvents in it to kind of accelerate drying and to keep the gun from remaining super oily. One of the tricks with it is you have to read the instructions. RTFM, read the fucking manual. If you read the manual, you will find that it says that you're supposed to let it sit. I think you apply the first coat, let it sit for about 30 minutes, apply the second coat, let it sit for between 5 and 15 minutes, and then wipe it off. This gun was sitting right in front of a fan, and it's also an older gun that's very, very dry. So this thing was sucking the oil up really, really fast. And the problem with Watco teak oil is that it will get sticky and almost leave a residue if you don't follow the instruction or you let it sit on there for too long. So if you have let it sit on there too long, what I usually do, and I've done it before, I've had a customer walk in, distract me, and 4 hours later I come walking in the back and I'm cursing. So if that ever happens, use mineral spirits, wash that onto it, paint it on essentially, and then give it about 2-3 minutes to kind of soften up, and then strip it, and then begin refinishing with the oil once the paint thinner or mineral spirits dries. So usually takes a couple hours. Now with this stuff, I like to do my 2 coats, and I'm going to set it aside and I'm going to let it sit overnight. The next day I've got another finish that I use. I use a Tung Oil Finish that I've made, and it's kind of a harder shell and less permeable to the water. Alright, so I'm going to clean up just a little bit. I always like to make sure the caps are on anything I'm using. That way I don't knock it over. And then we just grab a couple paper towels and we wipe this thing down. So this gun has sat for a few minutes, so it's been sitting long enough for me to begin doing this anyway. So really all I'm doing is I'm just wiping off the excess, because if I don't, it's going to get all sticky. And I'm going to make sure that I get it out of all the little cracks and crevices, because it kind of cakes up sometimes in different places. And in particular, I'm going to make sure that I get it all out of the track. It's very important. But that's really pretty much it. I'm going to take the paper towels that are soaked with this finish, and anything that's got mineral spirits on it, I'm going to take that out back, throw it in my fireproof box, and let it sit and dry before we throw it out. So, but I don't want to risk spontaneous combustion in the shop. That's pretty much it for this part. I'll be putting all the gun parts back on it here in the next day or two, and I'll bring you back in for that.